Welcome inside this season debut edition of Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo joined by Anthony Herron.
This is the very first one?
New season.
All right.
New look. And you could argue inside the Big Ten a new look, Anthony, with so many impact players now moving on to the next level.
Without a doubt. And there's always new talent that cycles through this conference, so we know how that tends to roll. And in the end, the coaches, the fact that none of the head coaches cycled through either, so you have a lot of coordinator turnover, but you don't have any head coach turnover. I think that's something where we should see the depth of this conference enhanced.
And once again, not just consistency at the head coaching ranks, but excellence.
Yeah.
Perhaps the best group of head coaches collectively of any Power 5 conference in the country. And while some things change, a lot of things stay the same. And I am referring to the top of the AP preseason top 25. For the seventh time in 15 years under Nick Saban, Alabama is number one, but Ohio State comes in ranked second in both the AP and the coaches poll. Michigan also top 10 in both of those polls. Michigan State top 15 in both, and Wisconsin top 20 in both. You see 5 other schools received votes in the AP poll, 4 others in the coaches poll. So when you look at this, Anthony, those top 4 schools make a ton of sense to me to be inside the top 20. I'm a little bit surprised that schools like Iowa, your alma mater, and Minnesota didn't get a little bit more love after the seasons that they had in 2021.
And both those programs have a lot that returns, especially Iowa. Now, of course, the Hawkeyes offense is something that leaves a bit to be desired, so I can see why folks wouldn't necessarily be as high on them preseason. But I'm pretty bullish on the Gophers. And overall, even when you look at just the teams that are in the top 20 within the Big Ten, I think Michigan State, a lot of folks are trying to figure out whether or not last season was a bit of an aberration, if they can repeat a lot of that success and some of those kind of miraculous wins that they had late in games. But they're well coached. We were just talking about the coaching in the Big Ten. They have continuity at both coordinators. I don't see any reason why we should anticipate the Spartans taking a big step back.
And we'll discuss Michigan State in depth coming up in just a moment. Same with Wisconsin. Consistency at the top with Paul Chryst and Jim Leonard as DC. They do have a change at the OC with Bobby Ingram and a ton of defensive talent to replace. We'll get into Wisconsin in just a bit. But we are going to start with the highest ranked of the Big Ten teams. And no surprise to see Ohio State at number 2, returning 12 starters, 6 on offense, most notably, of course, Heisman finalist C.J. Stroud. Some issues on defense the past couple of years, giving up big plays, perhaps not being so physical. So Ryan Day made a change. Got Jim Knowles to come over from Oklahoma State. We'll discuss his impact in just a bit. And, of course, we won't have to wait long to see exactly what this Ohio State team has, opening up at home under the lights, first weekend of the season against Notre Dame. Now, I'll make this statement about Ohio State. As good as this offense was a year ago, even losing Chris Olave, even losing Garrett Wilson, losing some keys on offense on the offensive line, I think this offense will be better this year, and here's number one reason why. Okay. A year ago when we sat here, C.J. Stroud hadn't thrown a pass in college. It's hard to believe, right? And the step that you can make from year 1 to year 2, as good as Stroud was a year ago, I think the game truly slows down for him in 2022.
And you saw him in Indianapolis, as I did. He's always been a confident football
Very
player.
mature.
And even coming out of high school, C.J. Stroud was the type of guy that had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because he wasn't immediately vaulted towards the top of the recruiting rankings. And that was, to me, a part of what played out on the field last season, where he didn't mind suffering some of the slings and arrows, some of those expectations from Ohio State fans early in the season when his performance didn't seem quite up to that Heisman par. But he continued to ascend throughout the year, battled through injury. And this is one key to me, Rick. And I think what you're saying about the offense being better, I think that can be true. But it's not the personnel that I think is as concerning as whether or not I believe this Ohio State offense, the brand of offense that they deploy, to me needs to shift a bit as well. I think that Ohio State rushing attack needs to be a much bigger focus going into this season. I talked about it a lot on this show last year, where when you can lead with physicality, when you can lead with your ground attack, that provides a level of balance that not everyone has access to in college football. The Buckeyes can push folks around if they want to. They tend to, veer a little more towards a finesse brand of the game, which can score a whole lot of points, but sometimes someone else is big and physical enough to stand up to you.
Well, Travion Henderson averaged more yards per carry than any other back in the country that had at least 150 carries last season. And Mayan Williams, who didn't qualify for that stat because he had a lot less work, actually averaged about a yard more per carry than Henderson. So to your point, this is clearly a team that can throw the football. I think the bigger questions, obviously, are on the defensive side. Ohio State has given up way too many big plays last couple of years. And so Ryan Day goes out. He hires Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State, where he did great work with Mike Gundy's team. And they were a very physical defense playing alongside an offense that's similar to Ohio State, was high octane. Now, Day went out and said, I want this defense to be top 10. We heard Knowles last week say, I wish he had charged me with being not top 10, top 5. To me, I'm not ready to say those are unrealistic expectations, but that's an awfully high bar to reach.
It is. Now, the personnel is usually not an issue in Columbus, so we'll see. Do they have a Chase Young? Do they have a Bosa brother coming off the edge? Maybe not, but they do have Jack Sawyer, who is a highly regarded recruit. They've got Zach Harrison, who returns for another season in Columbus, who was one of the top edge defenders in the country when he came out of high school, and he's had a nice career in Columbus. JT Tuimoloau, he's a player who can play all along the defensive front. So they have talent along that D-line, and we know they're very gifted on the back end as well. But can they stay healthy back there? If they are healthy, how many plays get made? The scheme that Jim Knowles is going to deploy will have more movement within the front seven. That should be something, even for a player like Zach Harrison that maybe hasn't shown to be quite as special, quite as crafty, getting off of blocks and slipping into the backfield. Calling him into some movement, I think that'll allow the Buckeyes to wreak some havoc on the opposing side of the line of scrimmage. And what's key to me, back to the point about the run game, Rick, when your offense leads with physicality, leads with physical dominance, your defense practices against that on a regular basis. I think that is so huge for Ohio State in games where we saw the Buckeyes get pushed around last year a few different times against Oregon, against Michigan, even Utah put up a bunch of points and yards on them. Maybe that front seven, if the offense for the Buckeyes is accustomed to being physically dominant, I believe that aids the Ohio State defense.
All right, before we leave Ohio State, we would be remiss not to talk about the opener against Notre Dame. Good thing or bad thing to open up against such a quality opponent before you've played anybody else on your schedule?
I believe it's a great thing. I do, because to open up with an opponent who you're heavily favored against, that can provide some comfort. But what questions do you really answer in a scenario like that? To open up with a team like Notre Dame especially, because, get this, man, Ohio State has the most production returning in the Big Ten.
That's a scary thought.
The Buckeyes, all the talent they lose to the NFL, and they got more guys coming back who made plays for them last year than anyone else in the conference, amongst the most in college football. They should be ready for an opener.
They do not rebuild in Columbus. We know they reload, and that will be the case once again. So many storylines, by the way, heading into that game against Notre Dame. Of course, new head coach Marcus Freeman, one of his graduate assistants, James Laurinaitis, good friend of ours. Maybe a little bit of Ohio State knowledge and connection there. Cannot wait for that game on September the 3rd. Now, that's the start. Of course, Ohio State ends the regular season, as it always does, against Michigan. But this will be a very different Michigan team, because the Wolverines now have the confidence and the belief that they can beat Ohio State after what happened last year in Ann Arbor. Now, Anthony, you mentioned the coordinator changes. They're abound for Michigan. You also lose guys like Aiden Hutchinson, number 2 overall, David Ajabo, Dax Hill. Those are all on the defensive side. They lose some key parts offensively as well. I understand why Michigan is top 10. I think you and I have a little bit of a disagreement here. I think they are around number 10. Some people believe they are top 5. You're slightly more bullish on Michigan than I am, because I think it's hard to replace those guys defensively. Why do you like the Wolverines in 2022?
Part of it is just kind of like their awkward offseason where Jim Harbaugh sort of thrives in that. Like, he doesn't mind where things were a little bit uncomfortable. He attacks these things head on. And seeing him in Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago, man, it was just kind of this very lighthearted, very comfortable version
He
of
was
Jim
really
Harbaugh.
chill. He was making a lot of jokes. During my interview, he referenced my cousin Vinny when I asked him about getting ready for the season. And he said, I'm like Marissa Tomei. My clock and my biological clock is ticking. I'm ready to get back. And I'm looking at him thinking to myself, this is Jim Harbaugh.
Is this my
right?
Jim Harbaugh? Like, is this the same dude? But he just seems so relaxed. And I believe that him exuding that will make a difference with his squad as well. I think it did last year, where Jim Harbaugh perhaps lightened up a little bit and the team seemed cool, confident, comfortable. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you personnel advantages, and certainly everything they lost on defense from last season, that will end up mattering. What I have my eye on, though, is Sharon Moore, is Jim Harbaugh, is that Michigan offense for this season. Are they willing to open things up a bit? I'm not saying, don't run the football. Go ahead and beat people up between the tackles. Lead with that. But, man, do they have some talent on the outside. They got some playmakers at receiver. They've got running backs they can get out in space and make sure that points will go on the board. Then as you grow, that defense, you'll have every opportunity in the world to establish something on that side of the football. But to me, Michigan's offense should be electrifying this year. They should push folks around. They should throw the ball deep. I mean, just think about if they took maybe a Michigan State type approach offensively with their personnel that is deeper than what's in East Lansing. That's what I'd like to see from Michigan this year. Will they put up huge points? Will they not just keep it, kind of refined in between the tackles because they have the personnel to do it, frankly, regardless of who's in their quarterback?
That's my next question, because the offense does change a little bit, whether it is McNamara or whether it's McCarthy, but they give different looks to opposing defenses. Now, there were times last year when I felt like the guy had rhythm that was in there and got replaced because it was part of the game plan. It was part of a package. It was a timing deal. I wonder if they do that this year, or if it is more a matter of, listen, McNamara is hot now. He is our guy. We are sticking with him. I mean, he is the guy that for the main part got them to the college football playoff a year ago. Yeah. But McCarthy is in there just dying to show off what he has, and he does have singular talent.
Oh, I mean, there are very few quarterbacks in the country with the overall physical skills of J.J. McCarthy. So if you're looking at that every day in practice, it's hard not to put it onto the field. I will say this, though, as it got it deeper into the month of October last year, J.J. McCarthy had a few key turnovers. His reps did diminish for a little while, and you saw where Cade McNamara was the main guy leading Michigan down the stretch run. A couple weeks off, let's get into postseason play. Then you see more fun stuff from J.J. McCarthy. But this offseason, McCarthy's been banged up, so he hadn't had the opportunity to even truly compete for the starting job as much. I believe we'll get into the regular season. Cade McNamara will start initially, and then from there, we'll see. If J.J. McCarthy starts to make some plays, then maybe his reps enhance from there. But Cade McNamara has earned the ability to be the starter.
Awesome. So finally, you're really confident with this offense. I talked about what they're losing defensively, and Mike McDonald, remember, is gone now, back to the NFL. So you have a big-time change at D.C., and you saw the impact that he made in his year in Ann Arbor. I'm slightly concerned by that. You're not.
Because we just see Michigan have good personnel and play at a fairly high level on defense most seasons. Now, when you get to certain opponents and their man coverage, like if we eliminate the COVID year, Michigan's had a quality defense every year. Now, that being said, we don't really know who those guys are going to be this season. But even talking to them in Indianapolis about that, the main sort of, promise that was made is that someone was going to step forward. Who that would be, who would be this year's Aiden Hutchinson, not only as a playmaker, but as sort of a linchpin within that locker room. That's really key for any team, but especially on defense, where your sort of collective temperament has to be at this fever pitch, snap in and snap out. It's going to be really, really important for them to find out who that leader is, or plural, who those leaders are.
Now, those are some monster-sized 18 shoes to fill when you're looking to replace. I'm just a guess.
Okay.
When you're looking to replace the number 2 overall pick, I'm guessing they're larger than mine.
See his dance moves, by the way, on Hard Knocks?
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. A guy that talented can do all that. He's already a multi-millionaire. Come on, man, it's enough. Michigan State's Mel Tucker living by the if it's not broke, don't fix it theory. One of 3 Big Ten teams that did not make a change at either head coach, offensive, or defensive coordinator in the offseason. And of course, for good reason. Michigan State had a tremendous 2021. Most of the defense returns do have some big holes to fill offensively, most notably Kenneth Walker. September 24th, to me, a defining game at home against Minnesota, 2 teams that are obviously trying to catch up to the other squads in their respective divisions that are considered, at least right now, to be preseason favorites. Before we look at 2022, I want to look at 2021 because Michigan State so far exceeded expectations that I think Mel Tucker kind of changed the time frame. When he took over and the COVID year was kind of a throwaway year, I think most folks looked at this program and said, okay, 3 to 5 years before they get back to challenging Ohio State and Michigan. Now it's like, no, after last year, let's do it in 2022.
It was pretty incredible to watch that play out. I called their game week 2 last season. I hadn't gotten to see them in person at all during the preseason. And I came away from that game against a, unranked opponent, non-conference foe, that Kenneth Walker III didn't even have to play because he got banged up in the opener against Northwestern. They still controlled the game to such a wide extent. They made plays at every level of their defense. They weren't dominant, but then offensively, they were able to push folks around with the rushing attack. They had their flea flickers going in the passing attack. It was just such a versatile approach schematically, and the personnel there, you could tell, were completely and automatically bought in to what Mel Tucker had already built there. So I just loved what I saw and came back on this set the next day and said, you know what, man, they're really good. Like the Spartans, if they're not ranked next week, they got to beat Miami, and then they're going to be ranked from there on out. It just looked like a really good, complete football team, and it was like a night and day difference.
So there will be a difference in the backfield with Walker gone, but they have some talent back there. Interested to see Jalen Berger, former Wisconsin back, transfer into East Lansing. Of course, Peyton Thorne had a terrific 2021. They have speed and talent on the outside, and I think you bring up a very good point. The aggressive play calling. It's easier to do that when not as much is expected of you, right? Because you're kind of playing with house money. Does that change this year, or does Michigan State offensively have the same attack mode even without that fallback option of Kenneth Walker? To me, that will be kind of the defining factor with their offense this season.
That's just the way that Mel Tucker and Jay Johnson, I called some of the games when they were together at Colorado as well. That's just kind of how that combination is wired.
You don't see any change.
Offense. I don't see any change at all. I think we're still going to see flea flickers. We're still going to see reverses. We're still going to see a downtown sort of attack mentality to the offense based off of play action. And that's the thing that stands out to me that I believe a lot more Big Ten programs need to look to deploy. Yes, lead with the ground attack. Make sure that someone else has to respect you. Have a heavy box. Force those matchups on the outside where you have talent. Where they're going to have Jaden Reed out there who they can try to feature and focus one-on-one. Feed it to him when those opportunities are there for you. So I think we're still going to see an aggressive offense.
And I think defensively, this team could be as good as maybe any in the Big Ten. They return 8 starters. Cal Haladay was a freshman All-American last year. 1 or 2 holes to fill up front, but that back 7 is going to be so good. I think Xavier Henderson has been in college since like 2012 at this point.
And he's wearing bifocals, essentially.
Right.
He doesn't need the glasses, but he's wearing them for a look just because he is an elder statesman at this point. I do think, though, because of the way their offense operates, their defense can be more aggressive over there as well. So they're going to look to take the ball away. Statistically, that pass defense we talked about so much last season, it's a big bugaboo for the Spartans. You would imagine that will improve going into this season as well. And as long as that defensive front 7 can hit blocks, can force opponents into some third down scenarios, then you have an opportunity at least to get off the field. And with the experience that returns, I don't necessarily see why we should anticipate Michigan State's going to take a step back.
I think I completely agree with you, and I think if they do that, what a rebound for Mel Tucker after that year 1 that was so choppy with COVID and everything, to have those as your first bounce back seasons, if they can maybe match what they did a year ago. Of course, they'll have to do it without Kenneth Walker, not just one of the top rushers in the Big Ten a year ago, but he was one of the top rushers in the entire country. I mean, Walker, when you look at today's big stat, averaged nearly 137 yards per game, one of only 3 backs to average over 100 per game. You may forget about Chase Brown and look at the man in the middle. Braelon Allen, nearly 106 yards per game. But most of those came late in the year because, remember, Ches Malusi was the starter for most of the year before he got injured, and then Allen became the man for Wisconsin. So
they
what
had to
can
wait
he
until
do?
he turned 16.
Yeah, he did it all as a 17-year-old freshman, by the way. So what can he do as an encore? Well, Howard Griffith has that answer as we bring you today's edition of The Big Interview.
Pleased to be joined by one of the best backs in the country. Tell me how the offense is a little different now with Bobby Ingram being the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I would say overall it's pretty similar. Run game switched up a little bit. Pretty much a similar scheme. Obviously different verbiage and different play calling and stuff like that, but overall pretty similar. I'd say it was easy for us to pick up. So that always makes it better when you get a new coach in there and he makes it pretty simple for you. So it's been cool. And the passing game obviously is switched up a little bit, and we're taking more shots downfield, which we like to see as running backs, kind of help us spread the box out a little more, make it a little easier on us, and it's cool to see everybody making plays.
Tell me a little bit about the receivers, because now you got some more weapons, some new guys on the team. Talk a little bit about those guys.
Yeah, those guys have been working. I saw it in spring, guys making incredible plays. Chimere, Skyler, Keontae, Marcus. All those guys, making huge plays for us and made great strides. Skyler and Marcus being freshmen last year, and Keontae's joining us as a transfer, who was also a freshman last year. Seeing those guys make the strides that they made is real cool to see, and I'm excited to see them play.
Coach Bostad coming back, coaching the offensive line. I've been around and watching him coach that position for a long time. Now he's coming back to an area where he's very comfortable. Tell me what it means to have a guy like that and the way he coaches, his style he brings.
Yeah, he gets those guys going, and he makes sure that they do their job right. And obviously the O-line is very important to me and the rest of the running backs, and they make our job. They're the only reason that we can do our job. So having a coach like that to get those guys ready is very important. I love Coach Bostad and love what he does with the O-line. I'm excited to see how they perform this year.
Some of the goals you have maybe personally this year that you want to achieve?
No, I don't really like to speak on it too much. Most of the my goals are team oriented, and there's a lot of things that haven't been done here that I would like to accomplish. We haven't won a Big Ten championship in 10 years, so that's first and foremost is getting us a championship. And obviously, ultimately that'll probably put us in the playoffs to have a chance to play for that national championship.
Talk to me about some of the things from an offensive standpoint, not necessarily defense, that you guys need to continue to improve on to put yourself in a position where you can compete for that championship.
I think it's right now, in this part of camp, it's really locking into the details and make sure every little thing that we're doing is on point. That's what was going to get us to that point. I think are the details, and then also just kind of expanding, what we like to do on offense. Not being just considered. Obviously, we want to run the ball. That's just Wisconsin, but being able to take the shots downfield and put up points whenever we feel like it. Really, be that explosive offense that we want to be.
Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time. Have a great year.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Half the offense returns, but Wisconsin has to replace 8 starters on defense. You heard Braelon Allen reference Bobby Ingram, the new OC. And the schedule is difficult as it is, playing the West, which is on the rise. But how about the crossovers on the road at Ohio State? That's the conference opener. And a few weeks later, on the road against Michigan State. All right, Anthony, we heard Braelon Allen talk about the fact that Wisconsin's going more down the field during training camp. They have explosive receivers. They're going to open it up. I don't buy it. I don't believe
Light in the box. That's all that is. Hey, light in the box.
When game day comes around, you live and die with your bread and butter. And once again, the bread and the butter this year will be Braelon Allen and Chez Mellusi. I like Graham Mertz, but I trust those two guys a lot more than I trust him.
And it's worth trusting the Wisconsin offensive line, who historically has been amongst the best in college football as well. And they didn't perform all the way up to Badger standards, blocking the run last year until late in the season when they had more reps together as a unit. And while they lost some talent to the NFL from last year, a lot of that experience, a lot of those snaps return up front on the O-line. So that certainly matters. And I think it'll maybe be the inverse approach. I asked Paul Chryst about this in Indianapolis, just whether or not early last season was there a bit of a notion of seeing what Graham Mertz is really capable of. Maybe if the offense opens up, can they try and see if there's another level that Wisconsin can go to maybe be a full-on national championship level program? Graham Mertz's performance, the O-line's performance wasn't quite to that standard. Once they condense things, then we got sort of that standard Badgers attack. This year, maybe the inverse approach. Maybe early in the season, you lead with Braelon Allen. You lead with that offensive line. Start to stack some dubs, and maybe as the season goes on, if Graham Mertz gets comfortable enough, then you expand the offense and the playbook, and Chimere Dike has some opportunities down the field.
History typically repeats itself. And when you look back over the past 15 years of our Big Ten Network career, and you look at Wisconsin and how successful they've been, how many quarterbacks jump out to you as game-breaking quarterbacks? Russell Wilson and Russell Wilson, right?
Guy.
Now, they've had great – I mean, Scott Tolzien had turned into an NFL quarterback.
Brooks Bollinger.
Joel Stave had a lot of success, but they live and die with the run, and they live and die with defense. Now, defensively – Jim Leonard is arguably, and I believe he is, the best defensive coordinator in all of college football. Seen what he has done with that team. But they replaced 8 starters, and not just 8 starters. Linebacker of the year, Leo Chenal, is gone. Jack Sanborn is gone. Just happened to see what he did in the preseason with the Bears the other day. I mean, we are talking about 2 remarkably productive players on the arguably most important part of that defense on the inside. Will they be able to plug those holes? That, to me, is the biggest question for Wisconsin this season.
We do know that Nick Herbig is back. He's, to me, one of the guys who are one of the front runners for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year going into this season. And usually you have kind of the one linebacker that we know for the Badgers, and then someone else ends up emerging. So, like, we knew last season going in that Jack Sanborn was going to be the guy, and then here comes Leo Chanel out of nowhere. No one really knew what to expect from him, and then he burst onto the scene. There's going to be someone else in that linebacker core for the Badgers that emerges alongside Nick Herbig in that same capacity as well. And up front, as long as they're hitting blocks, they'll put opponents in long down positions on third down from there. Then you can just go sick them, and Jim Leonard can do some fun stuff with some exotics.
It has been fun to watch those linebackers. I mean, we thought Chris Braelon would be okay, turned into an All-American.
Right.
Jack Sitchie went from an unknown to being an impact linebacker. You brought up some other names. They do. Yeah, I know Penn State's linebacker but over the last 10 years, I think Wisconsin may have an argument back and forth with the Nittany Lions. The Big Ten women's soccer preseason poll was released on Monday, and no surprise to see two schools that have been at the top of this sport for quite a while, Penn State and Rutgers, coming in as the co-preseason favorites, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio State rounding out the preseason top five. Well, Iowa starts the preseason with high hopes, seeking to be the West's first repeat division champion and get back to Indy in back-to-back years since 2016 and 17. Return 14 starters. That's the good news. The not-so-good news, check out the first two of those notable games. How about crossover dates? You get both Michigan and Ohio State in the same year. Schedule makers maybe not doing the Hawkeyes any favor with those particular games. And, of course, you have to play Wisconsin and Minnesota late in the year, a couple of important trophy games for the Hawkeyes as well. Rick Pizzo back with Anthony Herron, a man who knows a thing or two about the Iowa football program and expectations in Iowa City. What are the expectations? I mean, Kirk Ferentz has done this for so long and with such success, and yet, even with success, getting to the championship game last year, you heard all those grumblings, especially about the offensive play calling and how they were running the offense. How does Kirk Ferentz approach 2022?
I believe the growth and development that we tend to see with Iowa football, that's the approach that Kirk Ferentz has always taken. It's a part of what's led to the success. And when you have this degree of talent returning in Iowa City, there's no reason to believe, because we've seen it historically, that these players won't continue to improve. And so on offense, that did struggle a lot last year. It's being kind to say that they were inconsistent last year on offense, especially in passing the football. But all the experience that's there, not only with Spencer Petras, the anticipated starter at quarterback, but even Alex Padilla got a couple of starts. He got reps out there. And now Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator, Kirk's son, now he's going to work directly with the quarterbacks as well. And so as the QB coach, that communication between him instituting the game plan, calling the plays in game, and working directly with them in instituting the game plan, then that should enhance some execution. And while Tyler Linderbaum is gone, most of the offensive line, aside from
they were really young up front last year.
They were so green and inexperienced. So this should be a more complete offensive line for Iowa than we saw last year. They did lose some talent on the outside, but they do have maybe the best tight end in the Big Ten in Sam Laporta that returned.
Yeah, Laporta's fantastic. Some of that talent that left surprising. Charlie Jones, who was getting plenty of PT, both receiver and as a return man, transfers to Purdue. Great news for Purdue, a loss for Iowa. We saw Arlen Bruce last year kind of become one of those guys who could maybe do some special things this year. Johnson as well. And, of course, defensively, Iowa is going to be Iowa. I love talking with all the coaches in the Big Ten when I go on the road. One of my favorite coordinators, maybe my favorite coordinator to talk to, is Phil Parker, because he is the most old school, dialed in DC that you could ever want. This is my philosophy. You're going to play it this way. You're going to play it well. You're going to play it hard. And they do, and they do it every year. And this year, they returned so much talent, including Jack Campbell, Riley Moss, who's going to be in the running as one of the best defensive backs in the entire country. I don't see any reason, even with guys like Van Valkenburg gone, I don't see any reason why this defense takes a step back.
And make sure you let Phil know that Jim Leonard is the best defensive coordinator in college football as well. Like when we're there,
Phil's not far behind, in my opinion. I think that I'll probably keep out of the conversation. Thanks for bringing that back around.
Yep, no problem. But I do think that because Iowa has always been so consistent, not only with their scheme, but with their approach, to your point, that Phil Parker takes. And so you can have young guys. We're going to see multiple true freshmen playing significant roles on Iowa's defense, both on the back end and up front for the Hawkeyes. And part of that is because they've been able to start getting better in-state recruiting. You get 4- and 5-star players coming from the state of Iowa, coming from within that region. And so we're going to see a guy like Xavier Wangpa, who's going to be on the back end for the Hawkeyes this season as one of these young playmakers in the secondary. Aaron Graves on the defensive front. Kirk Ferentz has already said they're anticipating him to play. So it should be a deeper program, top to bottom, because a lot of the enhanced recruiting that's have been guys who are going to come in and contribute on defense. So can Iowa's defense be even better in addition to all these returning starters and playmakers from last year? I know Phil Parker's going to give everything he's got at it.
Yeah, for the viewers out there, pronounce Xavier's last name one more time.
Wangpa.
Because it is a name that you are going to want to know.
Yeah.
He is going to be an immediate impact youngster. There's no question. And a great
Their special teams coach, LeVar Woods, having Xavier Wangpa back there on the back end, and as a return man maybe too. There's a lot they can do with him.
Yeah, he's a remarkably talented young man. Again, remember that name and, of course, how to pronounce it. All right, Penn State is another intriguing team coming into 2022 because they did have a major change at D.C. Now, Brent Pry, great years, did some great stuff, offer other opportunities. In comes Manny Diaz, a defensive savant and a guy who has a ton of head coaching experience. Will know a lot about Penn State early. Purdue's expected to be really good. Nittany Lions opening up in conference play on the road against Purdue. And there are some known commodities, Anthony, with Penn State, most notably Sean Clifford, who is back for a 6th season. The unknown, I think, behind Clifford, where they had so many running back issues a year ago, some wide receivers, some talented guys are gone. Parker Washington should be able to step in. I am fascinated to see how this offense runs. I don't have as many questions defensively as I do as to what the philosophy is with the offense this season under Mike Yurcich.
And it'll be the second year in a row that Sean Clifford gets to work with Mike Yurcich. There's never been a time in Sean Clifford's career where he's had multiple seasons with the same offensive coordinator in the 12 years that Sean Clifford has been in State College. So this is a good opportunity for him. He talked about it to me in Indianapolis to grow within his knowledge, his mastery of this Penn State Mike Yurcich offensive system. That should pay dividends in addition to just being healthy. Think about that first month plus of the year. What was it, a 5-0 start for the Nittany Lions? That Auburn game where I came out of that thinking, man, is Sean Clifford going to be in the Heisman conversation, looking like the best player on the field in a victory over Auburn? He gets banged up in Iowa City and was banged up the remainder of the year. One thing I did ask James Franklin about was the QB depth that you alluded to a moment ago, because Sean Clifford's going to run the ball around some. He's going to take some hits. He's not the most massive guy out there. James Franklin pointed out, Christian Veilleux.
They like Veilleux.
They do. His first few series on the football field, man, backed up, behind the chains, hostile environment on the road. So development at that spot, at backup QB, should enhance the overall sort of comfort that I think Penn State fans can have if for some reason Sean Clifford has to leave the lineup. Backup QB should look better this year.
I called their spring game this year, and Veilleux was really impressive. There's very little drop-off in terms of command of the offense and ability to make all the throws. Of course, Diaz is there now as the DC. And I got to tell you, in Joey Porter Jr., in Jair Brown, who is a true leader in that secondary, they're going to have some questions in that Mike spot. Tyler Elson's been good there. They're not sure who's going to be that starter. But on that back seven, I have no issues. It's up front. Can they get enough pressure on opposing offenses to give that back seven a break?
It feels odd to put it in this frame, but I think the last couple of years here, it's kind of one of the golden eras of defensive back play at Penn State. The level of NFL talent that they have on the back end is really unrivaled when you look to the great defenses in Penn State's history. It's not like they have a depth, a slew of like NFL level talent in the secondary, because it is linebacker U. They put all these front seven players into the NFL. It's a lot of great, deep secondary talent that's there that Manny Diaz will have the opportunity to work with in State College. And so with that in mind, going back to the point I was making about the Buckeyes, Penn State, they don't pass the ball at an elite enough level to not run it. They can't get away with not running the football effectively. James Franklin has heard it. Mike Yurcich has heard it. Sean Clifford has heard it. This offensive line is more experienced now. Are they bigger? Can they push folks around? Can they open lanes for what will continue to be talented running backs that get recruited into State College? You got to open up some running lanes for them.
And a good offensive line, not just a running back's best friend, but also a defense's best friend as you get a little bit of a breather.
P.J. Mustafer will thank them for an additional break.
P.J. Mustafer is a really good
He
run
did pass his conditioning
stopper up front.
test, though.
Like to say, I'm the best player in the Big Ten, he told us during media day. Now, big fella, you got a chance to prove it.
Right.
You know, Minnesota ran the football on 68% of its snaps last year, more than any non-service academy in all of FBS football. But gone are 181 career starts on the offensive line. Back are both former OC Kirk Shiraka and his protege Tanner Morgan. So do the Gophers throw the ball more? Chris Autman-Bell certainly hopes so. Crab standing by with Howard Griffith.
Pleased to be joined by Chris Autman-Bell. First of all, I have to ask you, how's the body feeling?
Feeling amazing. For my 6th year here, you know, it feels amazing. I'm excited to be here each and every day, putting the work in each day, and taking nothing for granted. So I'm excited.
Having Coach Shiraka back, running the offense, how have things changed for you in that aspect?
We got a lot of pressure on ourselves to, be detail-oriented every day, bring the how every day, and just be with each other and be with each other all day. So it's good having him back. He's got us detail-oriented, and he brings that pressure on us, so it's amazing.
Talk about being detail-oriented. You're the old man in the group
Yes,
right
sir.
now. So you become that leader. How have you seen some of the younger guys grow as players?
They took major strides over this past year, the offseason, whether it was the winter and the spring. I see nothing but the guys just get better each and every day, from Dalen Wright to Michael Brown, Stevens, Daniel Jackson, Lee, all the younger guys as well, too. So I'm excited for them.
Having Mo healthy, having him back, how does that energize the offense?
That's amazing, man. We got an All-American running back, so I got my homie back. It's good to see 2-4 flying around and having fun and smiling, so it's amazing.
We watched this defense really take some big strides last year. You get a chance to go against them each and every day. That secondary is big and physical.
Yes, sir.
What are some of the keys that make that defense so good?
They just fly around. They love each other. That's one of the biggest things, man. I hate going against them every day. They got big corners outside like T-Tom. They got the Ryan Staffs. They got the Tyler Newmans, Jordan Howdens. They're just physical when they fly around, man. They play together, so it's hard to get past that.
Having your quarterback back is big for you. How have you watched him grow as a player?
6 years together, really 7 to 8, because we grew up together and, saying have the Western Michigan thing. So, but seeing him just grow each and every year and taking strides each and every day, I'm excited to see number 2 fly, man. So I'm excited.
Couple of keys to this offense to be successful and to have the success that the program wants to have.
We got to start with the JMSs up front, controlling the O-line. We got the Tanners taking over the whole offense, me and Mo outside and everything. So there's a lot of us, a lot of playmakers. We can do it this year.
Autman-Bell, one of 5 starters back on offense. Perhaps more importantly, Kirk Shiraka, the OC for the second time around when Minnesota's offense truly blossomed in 2019 with Tanner Morgan and Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman. Shiraka was the OC. As I pointed out with Michigan State, that we know a lot about the Spartans after September 24th. Obviously, the same can be said about the Gophers. And they follow up the next week against another West Division contender in Purdue. Rick Pizzo rejoined by Anthony Herron. To me, this is the most fascinating offense inside the Big Ten, and here's why. Mo Ibrahim was lost last year in the first game of the year. Mo is back. Minnesota used 8 different running backs last year. Chris Autman-Bell is back. Tanner Morgan is back. And Kirk Shiraka returns for the first time since 2019. But P.J. Fleck believes in running the football. So here's the connect. How connected are they in deciding what they want to do, and what will the offensive philosophy of Minnesota actually be in 2022?
And one of the good things is that they've got one of the most experienced quarterbacks in America to make that decision post-snap, because now Kirk Shiraka is bringing back that RPO system where the run-pass option will be within the hands of the quarterback. And Tanner Morgan's going to get a sense for whether or not he should hand it to Muhammad Ibrahim or should he flip it to the outside, because this is going to be, and P.J. Fleck coaches receivers, he's a pass receiver coach. He's done it at a high level. There's always high-level receivers wherever P.J. Fleck goes. It's a really deep receiver room. In addition to Crabbe, Dalen Wright, you got a lot of guys, Mike Brown, Stevens, who are there on the outside that have made plays. They were banged up not only at running back, really banged up at receiver last year too. A lot of guys got work out there that should pay dividends for them this season. So the same case I make for Michigan's offense, and I wouldn't necessarily put Tanner Morgan's physical traits on par with Michigan's quarterbacks, but the aptitude that he has for the game,
mind.
and he's got weaponry on the outside, and even the offensive line that was the biggest in America that lost a lot of those guys from last season, they're still experienced. And my favorite center in the country returns in John Michael Schmidt. So a guy who's a Remington candidate going into the year to help direct all that traffic on the inside. This should be one of the best offenses the Gophers have had under P.J. Fleck.
I could also make the argument that defensively, Mariano Sori-Marin, who everybody talks about as being one of the most cerebral defensive players, not just in the Big Ten, but in the nation, may be the most important defensive player in the Big Ten for any team this year, because there's inexperience behind him, ton of talent, but they're going to use a lot of young guys. Boye Mafe is gone from that front four. Jack Gibbons is gone, a guy who was remarkably productive. I think Sori-Marin's going to have to basically play and lead every snap for Minnesota defensively this year.
It feels that way. And a secondary that we've seen NFL talent they've had on the back end for the Gophers also, that should continue. But who's getting after the quarterback? That's where you reference some of the NFL talent. Boye Mafe already, making a star turn in the National Football League. So you don't have him. You don't have other guys from the defensive front who've been there in recent seasons. Has enough depth been established PJ Fleck says it has. Joe Rossi believes it has, but there's just guys we haven't seen out there needing to carry the day for the Gophers on a consistent basis yet.
So Minnesota hopes to challenge despite being unranked. You could say the same thing about the Purdue Boilermakers. Now, we expected Purdue's offense to be really good last year, and it was. I don't think we expected Aiden O'Connell to throw for 1,000,000 yards. But with the defense was much better than we expected. And when that happens, you often lose your DC. And that happened with Purdue as Brad Lambert heads to Wake Forest. But this team offensively, when you start to think about what O'Connell did last year and what Jeff Brom can do with no quarterback competition for the first time in a long time in West Lafayette, you have to think if they can continue to win games 50-41 or 48-40, they don't really care because I think they're going to have to outscore pretty much everybody this year. The defense, I just don't think can keep up with the level that it was at in 2021.
I don't know that the defense can keep up. I agree with that. And also, frankly, the offense. We've usually seen an alpha receiver there to sort of, have where the coverage had to be catered towards Rondale Moore when Jeff Brom first got there, and then David Bell in recent seasons. There's not that guy. There's depth at receiver. There's talent at receiver. And Jeff Brom is a magnificent play caller when it comes to passing the football. Aiden O'Connell will need to establish consistency, which late in the season last year, it seemed like he began to do. But there's a reason he was in and out of the lineup a few different times throughout his career as well. Jeff Brom completely sold on him now. He's going to be the dude. He's got to play at a consistent level and protect the football. And Purdue, conversely from some of these other programs I'm talking about where balance matters, Purdue, balance isn't going to matter as much because they just frankly can't run the football. They've shown they haven't been able to do that. So they lead with the passing attack. That's cool and all, but your receivers, who do you have that's kind of that alpha?
Anytime an analyst starts with, that's cool and all, but that's not necessarily a good thing. I'll say this, too. I don't like Purdue's opener for the Boilermakers. I don't like starting against an aggressive Manny Diaz-style defense when you have all these preseason expectations and a quarterback that has so much heaped upon him. You don't choose that, but I would prefer, if I were Purdue, I would prefer to ease into the year with these high expectations and start nice and easy 3-0 non-con and then deal with the monsters in the Big Ten.
And this kind of feeds into the history of Jeff Brom there. Now, this is a conference game, so that's different, but I've talked to Jeff Brom several times about just, hey, man, how about you lighten up this non-conference schedule early in the season, too, and get a few kind of cheap wins there early. He's never been into that.
I understand.
That is not his approach
I
at
understand.
All. And they were able to overcome it last year and to the point where they won a road game for a bowl trip. So, I mean, the season ended up being outstanding for Purdue last year, but this is just kind of what their schedule has tended to be. Again, it's a conference game, it's different, but the early season difficulty, Purdue tends to feed into that, and Jeff Brom thinks it sharpens his team for later.
Well, at least it's at home, and I'm the first one to admit that Jeff Brom is a lot smarter about football than I am, so I could be 100% wrong. I guess we'll know on September the 2nd, won't we? Yeah. Maryland intrigues Anthony, and to be honest, Maryland intrigues me as well. 15 returning starters, including, of course, Taulia Tagovailoa under center. You have a loaded receiver room. You have a defense that returns a lot of experience. If they are not household names, this is a team that went to a bowl game last year, laid it on their opposition, and a team that you and I, Anthony, are both very bullish on, mainly because if you look at that quarterback position and you look at Tagovailoa, he really had one bad quarter last year, according to Mike Locksley. It was the quarter against Iowa. After that, he was statistically one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten.
Week in and week out. And I feel like this portion of the show we should whisper because Mike Locksley doesn't really want folks to know how excellent his team should be. But Maryland's going to be really good this year. And every season in the Big Ten, we have one of those squads that ended up being kind of the surprise double-digit win club. It was Indiana at one point. It was Minnesota. The year before that, it was Michigan State last year. Now, they're in the deepest division in college football in the Big Ten East, so maybe Maryland isn't a double-digit win squad, but if there's anyone in the Big Ten I say can drastically exceed preseason expectations, it seems to me to be the Terps for those reasons that you lay out, Rick. And this is more what the standard approach is, especially for where the program was when Mike Locksley first took it over. Just season by season, he's adjusted personnel. He's had his scheme in place on each side of the ball, and they've just methodically gotten better every year. This could be a year where things pop, and really all they're missing at this point is kind of that seminal win, that big upset that's evaded them, and they haven't been consistent. They haven't even really been competitive against the ranked opponents, the best teams on their schedule. You got to be able to consistently compete and find that 1 or 2 times where you actually get over the top.
They nearly got it a few years ago at home against Ohio State. Had the chance to win, had a receiver open in the end zone that they missed, would have knocked off the Buckeyes. I will just say this about Maryland: when you start to look at that schedule, looking for that Seminole win, I think the Terps need to get them early, because when you think about November 5th at Wisconsin, November 12th at Penn State, November 19th at home against Ohio State. That's a tough stretch late in the season. Get them in September, get them in October. Northwestern also intrigues you. They're a fascinating squad. Each of the last 2 even-numbered years, they've gone to the Big Ten championship game. Each of the last 2 odd-numbered years, they finished last in the Big Ten West. So
what year is it?
So history tells us, right, that Pat Fitzgerald and the Cats are headed back to Indy. Those are high expectations. Cam Porter is back. One big question: who's playing quarterback, and can they play an efficient quarterback?
And whether it's Helinski or Sullivan, I do think that Fitz will start with the guy who's won the job in camp, but then be willing to make an adjustment on the fly here. And this is a squad in Northwestern that wants to lead with the ground attack, as I've touched on a lot. A lot of the anyone not named Purdue in the Big Ten West, they're going to lead with the ground attack. Can Northwestern throw it to the outside? Do they have playmakers out there? Maybe not. But if Jim O'Neill can really get that defense cranked up, then that's the combination that will need to work for Northwestern. Run it and defend it, and you'll be in every game late.
And it's not just Cam Porter. Remember, in his absence, Evan Hull had a tremendous 2021. One of the best pass-catching backs out of the backfield as well, so you can use them in a run-pass combo. At least that's what Fitz is hoping for.
In theory.
That'll wrap up this edition of Big Ten Today. Don't forget, coming up on Wednesday, debut edition, 7 Eastern, 6 Central, our focus, Iowa and Michigan. For Anthony Herron, I'm Rick Pizzo. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.